there's an old Polish proverb that says, when the wolf is chasing your sleigh, throw him a raisin cookie, but don't stop to bake a cake.
All right, welcome to Wolf and Raisin, the Banacek podcast. Is that what we're going with? Is it a podcast?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is something that this is certainly something I've never seen before. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we are your hosts. I am Father Malone, and with me, as always, right beside me on the other side of the continent,
is HP.
HP. He's too cool for anything more than initials.
That's look, when you have
that's all you get, and be thankful, peons.
It's just an easy way to sign my email, and it just sort of stuck.
I like it. It always reminds me of personal computing. The subject of our show clearly is Banacek, the television series from the early 1970s on NBC.
This pilot that we're going through right now, it premiered in 1972. It was part of I believe it was the Wednesday night mystery movie of the week.
Sometimes known as The Wheel.
Yeah, exactly. It was essentially a mystery movie of the week that would rotate with any number of other shows. It was Banacek. It was Cool Million with James Farentino, and it was a show called Madigan with Richard Widmark that I've actually heard of, but only because I think it was a movie before it was a TV show.
Right.
There was also apparently a show, which I'm dying to see now, called, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, Lanigan's Rabbi, about a small-town police chief played by Art Carney and his best friend, a rabbi and amateur sleuth played by Bruce Solomon, which was apparently based on Harry Kemmelman's popular Rabbi Small series.
I can't believe what was on the air then. Art Carney?
We're here, obviously, to discuss a show that's become very near and dear to our hearts, Banacek. So how did you come across the show and become a fan?
Like most great things in my life, it was discovered very late at night.
There wasn't, you had late night TV. You didn't have things like paid advertising and the same movies playing over and over and over again. You really had, a lot of, you could discover a lot after 1 a.m., let's say, on TV, Channel 38, WSPK, TV 38 in Boston. There was, they were often, just to fill time, they would play old shows at night. They would play old movies at night.
This is true, but, now kids are finding the cooler, weirder things elsewhere. Right? The television itself is sort of broken down, but this was television at its absolute heyday. And even then, when we were discovering it, it was, some 15 years after it had been a big hit. There's no question. Banacek was a big hit show. It was almost immediately relegated to the dustbin of history. Like I needed to stumble upon it late at night. So even then, television seemed to be kind of in free fall and very disposable. By then, George Peppard was one and only person. He was Hannibal Smith of the A-Team.
Yeah.
So when I caught this late one night, I freaked out because not only was Hannibal Smith basically Thomas Crowning it up, but he was doing so in Boston. HP and I grew up in Boston in the 1970s. This show is Boston in the 1970s. So
that is for sure. That's a big draw. There's some awesome second unit work, which I understand it was directed by George Peppard himself. But we can see here, I mean, there's some wonderful. There's not enough of it, but it's a great time capsule of Boston in the early 70s.
In the opening credits of this show it's not John Hancock, it's the Prudential Tower.
It's next to the Trinity Church.
But no, I mean, you can see it from the water while he's sculling.
Oh,
you can
right.
See it in the horizon.
Exactly.
You can see that it's only half constructed, which is fantastic.
One of the big draws for me, having been introduced to this show by you, Father Malone, is there's some great shots of Boston of the time and place, but frankly, I'm just such a fan of the shows of this era. I mean, every network was sort of overflowing with
The
mystery.
70s were awash in private detectives and regular detectives. Starsky and Hutch were out there. SWAT.
SWAT, well, SWAT was a little earlier, I think, and as was like you could probably put in Adam 12, and before that, Dragnet.
Absolutely.
The beauty of this is that all of these shows shared a central formula, which is essentially just your it was a gumshoe. We're talking Raymond Chandler, where you have a PI of some stripe in life who investigates a crime typically and is has his various contacts and his ways of doing things. In this case, the brilliant part of this is that it's not a cop, it's not a private detective, it's an insurance recovery specialist named Thomas Banacek.
A slightly effeminate, always turtlenecked, always well appointed Thomas Banacek, a Polish son of a Polish immigrant, grew up in Scully Square, which eventually became Government Center there in Boston. That was a rough and tumble neighborhood, if you didn't know. But I mean, why would you? Scully Square no longer exists.
This is absolutely true. And
quick aside. Did you ever see The Perfect Storm?
No, with George Clooney? No.
George Clooney, who is a friend of the Caesar Cut.
Yes, he is one of the.
He is definitely a Caesar acolyte, much like Thomas Banacek.
He's a Caesarian.
And in that movie, which takes place in Gloucester, Massachusetts, at one point, George Clooney's character says wistfully, "Go back to Scully Square." and I was sitting in the theater in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I went, "Oh fuck you! You just pulled me right out of this movie, you prick."
True in all counts, as far as his character is concerned. It's easy to see why his various rivals and opponents hate him so much, because he really is a hateable character. Ultimately, I think we can agree on that. You wouldn't mind taking a swing at Banacek.
Oh, I want to punch him in the face every time he comes on screen.
However, as we'll see in the course of this episode, he's also not somebody to underestimate, because lurking somebody who's an expert in among other things, judo.
Squash. He will wipe the court with you in squash.
He brokers no fools. He takes no prisoners.
Look, everyone had a gimmick in the 1970s. Speaking of all of these private detectives and television detectives, and what Banacek had and that they didn't was he was already very well off. I don't for 1 minute believe that the entire run of this series that he had to do any of these jobs. I think he not only enjoys the finer things in life, but really his entire reason for being is sticking it to this insurance company that screwed over his old man.
You can see very clearly. I mean, the man lives in opulence and amongst all of these supposedly incredible art treasures. But I think it's much more satisfying for him to your point, to stick it to the insurance company, because every episode is basically a matter of him being underestimated by the folks that are either that are working with him, working against him, despite the fact in the overwhelming evidence of his success. I think they quote
65% success rate,
and I actually give them credit. It would be very easy for them to say, like, well, he never misses, or he never fails to deliver the goods. I actually think that's a rare piece of realism in this show, that he's not perfect, but he doesn't have to be. He just has to be better than his biggest rivals, which is always the insurance company.
There you go. There's the ridiculous to the sublime as far as the gimmicks of 1970s television detectives. With Columbo, we're given this sort of rumpled exterior as if he were a dummy in order to lure people into a false sense of security. On the other end of that, we have Kojak, who has a lollipop. There it is.
I think it's safe to say at the time, I would say George Papard was you could call him a sex symbol.
At the time. Always, forever.
He clearly was portrayed as being, very very desirable, by women. We can see in this episode he's, Carly, the character of Carly, really initially starts out very adversarial, but there's something about Banacek that wins her over, despite the fact that she knows they're rivals. She knows that they're at odds. They're
Some reason, I'll tell you the reason. Piercing blue eyes.
and the salt and pepper hair, and
Oh my.
he
A
exudes
refinement.
and
An
he
old world refinement in a new world setting.
if we can accept the premise that Banacek and Papard is an extension of Banacek, it was a sex symbol. I'm fascinated by the idea that you'd mentioned Kojak and how he was another iteration, another sort of flavor of TV detective. But the incredible thing is that at some point in time, Telly Savalas, who played Kojak, was what was also a sex symbol. This is a paunchy.
What a weird decade we grew up in.
It was incredibly weird.
Do you know who else was a sex symbol? Elliot Gould.
Alan Alda was a sex symbol.
Alan Alda. What was going on?
The 70s war on sensitivity became the order of the day.
That's true.
But I do think when we're dealing with Telly Savalas,
we were tired of macho men.
Well, but I think that's you were getting a different type of macho man with Banacek and Kojak and their ilk.
I do wish Banacek had been a little more in tune with the youth culture.
When will he ever have to engage with anyone within that culture? Because he's dealing with with the rich. He's dealing with people who have a lot to lose. Money is on the line.
I think if, say, there were a Charles Manson-like case, let's imagine.
Okay, Banacek going after
where one of the Manson girls, we put her in a cell and now she's missing. Where did she go? Call Thomas Banacek. It's been 60 days.
She skipped bail? Is that he becomes a bail bondsman?
Perhaps the bail bond on Squeaky Frome was so high. And now we put her in the room, I swear to God. And then now Banacek has to solve the missing Squeak.
How does that translate to dollar signs for him?
It doesn't. No, we've already established Thomas Banacek does not need your money. He doesn't need your filthy lucre. He likes to have it. He likes to amass a fortune. But I think really the whole reason that he gets out of bed in the morning is to stick it to the insurance company and to prove that he is the smartest guy in the world. A bit like Sherlock Holmes in that regard.
I'm actually gonna maybe go against you on this a little bit, only because
I know. I'm sure he says it at one point. There's no profit in it or something.
Well,
like
no,
that.
no,
But
no.
I'm speaking to the depths of Thomas Banacek's character,
But if
and
we're-
not his words. His deeds, sir. His deeds.
Well, but the only thing that contradicts your supposition here is at the end when he lays out the crime to all of the relevant party, all the
Yes.
stakeholders, right? The deputy and Carly's there, and of course I think Jay is there also, his faithful
Yes.
chauffeur. And I think one of them at some point says like, who do we arrest for this, or how do we, and he says,
Not my
That's not
problem.
my problem. All
Yeah.
I need to do is find you that truck. I did
Right.
it.
That does not contradict my thing at all. That only supports my thing.
No, I think
He's not interested in the nuts and bolts of the criminal investigation to follow. He's interested in figuring out the crime and getting what he deserves out of it. And I think that what he deserves out of it could possibly be just the satisfaction of solving it.
Yeah, you know what? I think you've actually really convinced me on that.
Really?
No.
Oh.
And actually, you know what? We have to go to commercial now.
We have sponsors?
No.
All right, welcome back to Werewolf and Vincenzo, the Kolchak podcast.
It's Banacek.
Yeah, that's what I said.
No, you didn't. It's Banacek.
Yeah, Kolchak.
No, Banacek.
Kolchak. That's what I'm saying.
Father Malone, look at yourself.
Oh, no. It's these stupid UHF signals, man.
Just hit the tube. Give it a whack.
Okay, Thomas Banacek. All right, you mentioned earlier, the smugness. the smarm.
You can see those very self-same qualities in the A-Team, in the character of Hannibal.
100%.
In Papard.
Colonel John Hannibal Smith is the rough and tumble Banacek. There's very, very little difference between them. And obviously the connecting tissue there is George Papard, which means George Papard must have been like, how could anyone stand to be near him?
He must have been insufferable. And
insufferable.
Honestly, let me ask you, why did it only run for 2 seasons? It appeared to be a ratings winner. People enjoyed the show. It was successful. Why did it only run for 2 seasons?
What could have possibly tanked this juggernaut of late night television? Who is responsible, HP?
The man responsible is George Papard himself. The show was canceled because, well, George Papard was apparently going through a divorce at the time, and apparently to keep his future ex-wife from getting her hands on any of the money from this show, he just decided to put a bullet in it and be done with it.
He's just a sore human. He's a sore thumb of a human.
He just seems like such
HP. I'm having an existential crisis now.
Okay.
Clearly, George Papard is one of the worst human beings on the planet, and I adore him.
I'm with you on that.
How can this be? For he is the Kwisatz Haderach. Is that it? That must be it. It must be some sort of supernatural savior thing, because all signs point to I hate you as far as George Papard is a human, but I can't stop watching him.
He had a famous episode of the show Password Plus that I don't believe was ever really rebroadcast until fairly recently.
No, because he got so hot under the collar.
He got very hot under the collar.
George, it's a game show.
I think the clue was like hot dog, and the opposing team used the word hot in some other context.
Yes.
And George,
that's a faux pas, man.
Right
He's
or wrong?
right. I mean, there's no question he was right.
No. Papard is right, but it's the approach.
Dude, I get the sense that if you were to play badminton with George Papard, there's a good chance you were going to get a racket to the head.
He's like the scene in Big with John Hurd, and he's like, give me the damn ball, and they end up like basically wrestling because he can't admit that he's wrong. That is George Papard, I think, in a nutshell.
The George Papard John Hurd connection we did not know we needed, but there it is.
Well, now, do you know when George Papard passed away?
It was in the early 90s. I think it was like 93 or 94.
So it's very possible that their paths crossed.
I'm sure they had to have at some point.
He might have been in an episode of the A-Team for all we know. It could be.
Could be. You'd be surprised at the number of people who show up in the A-Team. Dean Stockwell was a minor flunky in an episode of the first season of the A-Team. It was staggering. Staggering to watch Mr. T getting more dialogue than Dean Stockwell. Dean Stockwell, the boy with the green hair. I love him.
Dean Stockwell, rest in peace.
So, as I said, that there's just something about Banacek, in particular Banacek. I mean, we all love the A-Team because we were all like, fucking 6 years old. I still love the A-Team, but I adore Thomas Banacek. That level of smarm is, as you pointed out, in the circles that Thomas Banacek runs in, that level of irony and sarcasm and bitter, soul-crushing wit is exactly what is called for.
The smarm and the charm. That's really what it is.
Speaking of smarm and charm, he couldn't have gotten there alone, HP.
That's true. And what a wonderful segue, Father Malone.
I want to ride on one right now. The segue was created by Dean Kamen And Dean Kamen was created by Jack Kamen, who's one of the original EC comic book artists. Anyway, I do want to talk about our supporting cast here. We're not delving too heavy into the plot of this particular episode. We're gonna get more into those as the plots improve. I'm not saying this one's bad. It's good, but it's not great. But I do want to talk about these characters because they are very important, not only to the show, but to the character of Thomas Banacek as well. In some cases, having formed him as a character, and in some cases, at least attempting to shape and help the perhaps unhelpable. But that mentor character leads us straight to Boylston Street in Boston, Massachusetts.
It's if you want to go and learn about the history of Russia in the 16th century, if you want to know about famous chess openings, if you want to find out about, you've come to the right place. This is Mulholland Books. Felix Mulholland, because as we've discussed, every detective show, every character like Banacek or like a detective needs that. Usually, it's a stool pigeon on the street.
Sometimes it's a Huggy Bear.
In a funny way, that's Felix Mulholland, always available to sort of bandy wits with Banacek, but also to give him a nudge in the right direction to solving the mystery that he's investigating.
That's actually one of the innovations on this show that, to me, sets it apart from a lot of the private detective herd that Banacek found himself running in. It's easy to have a character who drops in and out, who's kind of cool and gives the character the straight dope, and then they go on their way. Here, we've got a character who's a little more integral. This character has a deep connection with Thomas Banacek. Look at the way Felix is dressed when we meet him, and then watch Thomas for the rest of the episode, nay, the rest of his life. Before we continue, we do have to mention the turtleneck. HP, what are your thoughts on the turtleneck as a?
I have been known in my younger days to wear a turtleneck. I did wear the occasional turtleneck in retrospect, probably in tribute to Sprockets, to Detour.
Are they, as Mitch Hedberg suggested, just like having a really weak guy strangling you all day long? Or are they a fashion statement? I now actually feel pretty cool wearing a turtleneck.
I'm glad that you said that, because I
feel kind of debonair, honestly.
I do too. And look at this. You slap on a sport coat.
Oh my God.
You're off to the races, baby. Look at this.
Did you just get in from Europe? How was Vienna?
Let me tell you, the Concorde is as awesome as they always say it is. I had the beef bourguignon on the flight. It was delightful. So anyway,
all right. So enough turtlenecking. We gotta.
So anyway, does he ever have a bow tie? Does he wear a bow, like a big wide?
No, because he's not insane.
Well, but what about like a frilly?
Like a cravat, some sort of like a trochee, like Edgar Allan Poe, like wrapped.
No, but like think of Prom 1976.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yes. It's like a tuxedo.
Like a tuxedo with the frilly shirt and a big velvet wide bow tie. Did he ever wear anything like that?
I actually can see Thomas Banacek with the gigantic frilled shirt and a red velvet blazer, but I can only see him in that on New Year's Eve of 1969. Yes, I am that specific.
There's a scene where Banacek calls Felix, and it's the middle of the night in Texas, which means it's probably like 3 a.m. in Boston when he calls.
Felix is awake and like playing chess. What are you doing, Felix? He doesn't even need to be reading.
He's amazing. It's almost too good to be. He's almost superhuman the way that he's conveyed, because Banacek asks him a question about the Native American tribe that this murdered guy belonged to, and it's like falling off a log.
The instant recall of it all.
Instantly. I mean, and it's not like Apache. It's not some tribe that you've you can rattle off like Apache or Cherokee, some of the well-known tribes. It's really remarkable that he's like
super specific.
And not only that, there's a tenderness to their exchange that you've talked about. That
Completely.
It's not just
there's something very emotional about their relationship. Banacek calls him, and it's just another case, basically. But you can tell almost immediately Felix knows how upset he is given the circumstance. And his immediate reaction is to tell him to just drop everything and come home. So, yeah, I mean, this goes beyond Huggy Bear. This goes beyond, the guy we busted and is now like on our side. This is a deep relationship. And so his dad, we don't know the circumstances of his death, but clearly left Thomas's life all too soon. And I believe that Felix kind of swept in and filled that void for him.
There's something in this boy. I can't let him just go, be another kid lost.
No,
to the streets.
he's like a reverse Fagin in a way. Like
right.
There's a frustration that settles in when you're dealing with a show like this, because it's so serialized that while we do get these moments of exposition sort of dropped from time to time when a situation arises that calls for it, we don't get to sort of delve into the interpersonal relationships of these characters. And that's a drag because I do think the relationship between Banacek, Private Eye, and his informant Felix is an innovative one on this show, and I would like to know more about that.
Banacek from episode 1 to episode 17. You could play those back in any order, and he never had a wife. He never had a serious love interest for more than
That's not true. We're going to be talking about her.
What a wonderful segue.
Let's talk. We're going to talk about a character who specifically shows up on this episode. She's a major character in this episode. And then, much like Squeaky Fro, where did she go? Christine Belford.
She's gone. I knew her best as Samantha Sanders on Beverly Hills 90210. She played Steve Sanders, Ian Ziering's.
She's so mean.
You know her better.
Oh my God, she is,
who?
forever and ever emblazoned in my mind as Arnie Cunningham's mom in John Carpenter's adaptation of Stephen King's Christine.
Yeah.
I doubt you tried very hard.
She's fantastic. And the interesting thing is, so she plays a prominent role in this particular episode. She is one of his adversaries, but also becomes his love interest,
right?
Through reasons that aren't entirely explained outside of the piercing blue eyes. She starts out very upset with him.
That's actually like more of the innovation I'm talking about. Like why this show to me continues to endure. It's like, well, let's take Huggy Bear, but let's take him, an old intellectual, frail man who is also a father figure mentor to our lead. When we first meet Carly, she's just trying to sort of inveigle her way into his life and figure out what he knows so that she can scoop him, essentially. But then later, when she comes back and they're both working the same case, so they're in the same location, she does have this moment of like, you know what, fuck it. Like, and maybe it's the piercing blue eyes, or maybe she just likes Thomas Banacek, or maybe, I like the ambiguity of why she decides that she doesn't care that they're rivals, that it's okay that they would also be lovers. That to me is a promise that was not paid off in the rest of the first season, because what a great dynamic for a TV series where it's like heart to heart if they were out to kill each other.
I think that's a very liberated point of view for a show of that time. That's kind of, I don't want to use the overused phrase, sort of like, it kind of came out of the 60s, really, where people's attitudes were changing about sex and attraction and what it meant to be a couple and how you could couple yourself with other people.
Certainly, I mean, and look at Thomas Banacek. I mean, it ties into that as well. We talked about before this notion of like, we're sick of the tough guy, or we're sick of what we've been given as the macho tough guy character.
what you're seeing, I think, was the last vestiges of that archetype.
Yeah.
I can only really describe them as a Lee Marvin, Steve McQueen type, which is not that he was hard living or rough around the edges. He was different in that respect, but at the same time, he was still a man's man.
Yes.
There was no question. He basically lays it out when Carly goes to his motel room and basically offers herself to him, basically lets down any pretext of, look, I know we're after the same thing.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna let myself be seduced by you.
Or let's
right?
say she offers to have sex with him that night in a mutually pleasurable thing. Because here's the thing.
Sure.
There's no question in my mind at the end of this caper that if Thomas Banacek hadn't figured it out, Carly was going to. She just seems that good.
So Carly, as we'll see, she'll pop up in future episodes. She's much more prominent, and this makes the cancellation after the second season. So one of the things that's such a bummer about it is that she is so much more of a primary character in the second season.
Yeah, well,
you see her.
There's a course correction that went on here. Like somebody was paying attention and went, we know what was really good? That first episode, that dynamic with those two characters and that actress.
We've talked about Felix. We've talked about Carly. It's time to talk about the other most important person in Banacek's life, and that is his chauffeur,
Jay Drury. Lives on Drury Lane.
So first of all, the actor who played Jay is a guy named Ralph Mensa, who is also what I would call a ham and egger actor. He's in a million different guest spots, everything from Get Smart to Punky Brewster. He had a 46-year career. Anyway, he's played.
He's a character actor. He's a character actor. No, I'm not insinuating he was a drunk, but most character actors, let's face it. Looking at you, Rip Torn.
The thing about Jay is up until the last third of or quarter of the movie, really, he's an affable character.
Yeah.
Right. In a way, he's Banacek if Banacek hadn't gotten refined.
Right.
Right. He came from very humble beginnings. He really had nothing. He
sounds familiar.
That's right. He drove a cab in Chicago until he had some undefined health concerns.
Yes. I wonder what that could mean. Clearly the mob.
I was going to say maybe he's...
Oh, maybe he was character acting. In Chicago.
Now, in your...
HP, I myself have been known to character act on occasion.
I'm gonna. No, now we have to explore this. In your opinion, you feel like Jay ran afoul of the mob in Chicago?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
100%. Listen, it's not culturally sensitive that the one Italian character featured on Banacek happened to be involved in the mob. But I'm just trying to put myself in the mindset of a early 1970s television writer, and given this character as a possibility, and I'm gonna say, yeah, he's got mob ties.
And he becomes Banacek's chauffeur for the duration of his visit to Vantage, Texas, and in fact, he becomes kind of an accomplice to
completely.
Banacek.
Like he does some good work out there. He's distracting people with nudie pictures.
Cops. He's distracting cops.
I'd like to imagine that those photos were particularly vile, by the way. Like beyond the pale. Like, oh no, why do you have those in your wallet, Jay?
I have another opinion. Now this was such an embryonic time for sort of nudie pictures and
you think it was
like
the French postcard ladies?
Yes.
Think it was like that? I think Jay's seen some stuff, man.
There's a conversation between Jay and Carly later in the episode that is unsettling for a number of reasons.
To say the least.
Because it's basically she is like half dressed anyway, and he visits her in their motel room to basically he's pumping her for information.
Yeah.
Basically, but trying to do it in such a way that he's trying to come off like almost like a father, like a benevolent, like, oh.
It's very unusual, and it's very sexual, and it's just icky all around.
So the betrayal So we find out that Jay he's not the villain of the piece, but he is a villain. He's not a good guy.
He's taken this information and he's tried to scoop everybody. They show up to where they think the crime scene, or they show up to where the crime scene is. Jay's already there with construction equipment.
Because Jay is not coming at this from a position of true villainy. He's not after anything but he's got to get out of this life somehow, this depraved life of French postcards.
Of running from the mob while peddling potentially really bad porn to police officers. What else is there for Jay? So what we end up having is like Huggy Bear split in two here, with Jay Drury and Felix, with Jay on the ground and Felix sort of in the sky. Or is this a Spock, Bones, McCoy, ego, id, super ego situation?
Ultimately, Jay features in the rest of the 2 seasons. I mean, he is his loyal chauffeur. He follows him all over the place, to Los Angeles, to Las Vegas, back to Boston, everywhere. He
lives the life of Riley, thanks to Mr. Thomas Banacek. Let's face it.
Oh, absolutely. Do you think he has a room in Banacek's Beacon Hill house?
Absolutely not.
Where do you think he lives?
Down the street, or if there's a servant's quarters, maybe. But he does not.
That's what I mean.
Felix, I would allow Felix in my house. I would not allow Jay in my house.
No, Felix, I think.
Carly, oh yeah. Jay, not so much. As I said, we're not getting too heavy in depth into the plot of this particular one. It is a good mystery. It's a little hastily solved, and it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. The actual
no, but that's not out of.
But that is not the point. It's kind of never the point, really, with Thomas Banacek. Although, I mean, we're going to get to some clever ones, honestly. But this one was just kind of okay. But I do, in the remaining moments of our program, want to talk about some of the technical aspects of this show, setting it apart, as most of the other aspects of the shows we've talked about have set it apart.
There's this wonderful helicopter shot tracking Banacek, and it is Papard. It's not really, a double. You can see very clearly that it's Banacek, but it's beautiful. And the blades of the helicopter are creating this wonderful wash of dust and dirt kind of like flowing over him as he walks.
And that sequence in particular is a 2-minute sequence where nothing happens but him walking. Where would you get that on any television show now? Maybe on HBO.
Along with that, the thing that also can't be overstated is how well the music works. Now, through the whole episode, the music is wonderful. It bears mentioning that the individual responsible for the music here is a guy named Billy Goldenberg.
The mighty, mighty Billy Goldenberg. A name that we should all know, and it woefully unsung these days.
So the music during that scene where Banacek investigates, the scene of the crime.
Yes.
I think, and I'm not. We've had a lot of fun with some of the tropes and some of the things happening in this episode, but I am legitimately saying that music, I think, is wonderful. It really captures something reflective about the character of Banacek, but there's also a tension there.
Yeah.
And there's an ambiance to it because he's in the desert. He's working things around in his mind, and it really kind of lets you in on what he's going through at that moment, without being too literal about it.
Right.
And I honestly,
the best kind of music where it comments without being obtrusive or calling attention to itself. It's like George Romero used to say, like, the best editing is when you never notice it at all, and that's the truth, unfortunately. So. It's easy to overlook how skillful Goldenberg's contribution is to this, and how much that ended up informing the rest of the series. Honestly,
it's beautiful. I think as much, like I said, as much fun as we're having with the show, I'm being serious when I say that I think the music it's really a travesty. I can't find the music for sale anywhere.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that just about wraps it up for this, our very first episode of A Wolf and Raisin, the Banacek podcast. We want to thank you all for joining us. We hope you join us again for more insanely esoteric and specific jokes about growing up in Boston in the 1970s. I have been your co-host, Father Malone.
And I am your co-host, HP. The final words of wisdom, let's go to Banacek.
There's an old Polish proverb that says, if your socks are not in your shoes, don't look for them in heaven.
I think it suffered a bit in the translation.